Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for an inside look, a conversation with leaders, staff, and allies of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. My name is Karenina Grimble, board chair and proud supporter of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. On behalf of the coalition, I want to thank you for your support and welcome you to this time of learning and sharing. Because of you, the coalition was able to quickly respond to new and staggering challenges created by the coronavirus pandemic, while still maintaining very robust organizing and policy advocacy work. In just a few short minutes, you'll hear about how we pivoted to address the situation here in Illinois, the impact of your contributions, and the path ahead for our advocacy. But first, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Caroline McCoy. Caroline is a program officer at Woods Fund Chicago, a bold grant maker that draws on the power of communities to fight the brutality of structural racism and poverty. Her professional interests and passion include supporting community-driven strategies that influence equitable services, systems, and practices, and advancing racial equity and philanthropy. Caroline is also a dedicated board member of the coalition. Thank you for facilitating this discussion tonight, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Karenina. And I just want to say welcome to everyone on the Zoom call today. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for what I know will be a great conversation. Like you, I'm really eager to hear from and learn from our panelists. Go ahead and introduce our speakers. And maybe I'll ask our panelists to just give a quick wave so folks can see you. So first, I want to introduce Andrea Kaltz. Dre is the Chief Development Officer and Youth Advocate at LYTE, which is a nonprofit that provides youth in situations of poverty and homelessness with safe space, critical resources, and holistic support. Next up, Edrika Fulford. Edrika is a CCH Grassroots leader and a member of CCH's Mutual Aid Fund Steering Committee. I'd like to introduce you to Elizabeth Maldonado. Elizabeth is a CCH Grassroots leader as well and a member of the CCHS's Chicago Public Schools Focus Group. And last but not least, Sam Carlson. Sam is a research and outreach manager at CCH, sorry about that. Before we jump into the conversations, I just wanted to remind folks that there will be time towards the end of our time together for questions. So as questions are coming up, please feel free to drop them in the chat. So let me go ahead and jump into questions. And my first question is for you, Sam. So Sam, let's start with a little bit of context. Can you share some data about how the scope of homelessness before the pandemic hit and how the pandemic has affected those numbers?
So in the city, we know that around 77,000 Chicagoans experienced homelessness prior to the COVID-19 outbreak. This includes around 58,000 people that are experiencing homelessness by doubling up, which is staying with family or friends in overcrowded situations. And CCH leads this homeless estimate analysis for Chicago, and we rely on the most recently available US Census data. These data also show that homelessness disproportionately impacts Black Chicagoans, who make up 61% of the total homeless population. And prior to COVID, we saw a very slight decrease in those doubling up, but we also saw a nearly 2,000 person increase in those who stayed on the street or in shelters. So this is a development with troubling connotations today. The city's shelter system is a potential hotspot for COVID-19 infections, and homelessness is expected to rise dramatically with more and more people unable to pay rent. And this risk of homelessness is disproportionately impacting Black and Latinx Chicagoans. More than 60% of Black and Latinx households in Chicago report having serious financial problems because of COVID-19. So a lot of households are at risk of homelessness because of the pandemic, and it's shocking to think about the changes that need to happen to serve this huge influx.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you so much for sharing. Dre, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what changes you've seen at the LYTE Collective since March with the people you work with. Oh, I think you're on. Can you unmute, please?
So sorry about that. The young people that we work with are seeing just a whole new set of challenges on top of the challenges that they were already facing. So that's everything from losing jobs and then not being able to obtain new ones in the climate right now. A lot of our young people are working in what are considered essential jobs, so whether at supermarkets or pharmacies, but don't necessarily have the financial support for adequate housing, even with that employment. And so the opportunity to shelter in place for them was much more challenging, or has been much more challenging and continues to be. The mental health and isolation piece, especially for adolescents, has been a huge factor. And we've definitely seen an increase in anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress symptoms. And I would say also there's a greater spotlight on the disparities that were already being experienced by a lot of these young folks. So their socioeconomic status was already impacting what they had access to. And this definitely, came into light with things like not being able to have groceries delivered, or being the one to deliver groceries, having difficulty with transportation that was safe during this time. And definitely for us, we did a lot more mobilizing and getting to young folks around the city and helping them meet their basic needs, delivering groceries, baby products. And I think also realizing the importance of technology as a basic need and a human right. So the necessity to rely on phones and internet and computers to be able to stay connected and continue achieving goals, accomplish school, and even generally just, stay connected with their community and their friends in a way that was safe. And so we've definitely had to get creative and utilize a lot of the resources that organizations and foundations such as CCH have been able to provide us to make some of those things happen.
And two quick follow-up questions. One thing that you
Mhm.
mentioned was some of the challenges that are coming up with mental health. How is your organization sort of addressing that with your population that you serve?
So we definitely did a big sweep, reaching out to local therapists and agencies that provide mental health support. We do have licensed clinical social workers on our staff. And even beyond that, I think that a huge thing that we've done, one of our youth staff, she really encouraged this, and she's a person who has some lived experience and is young and has been through a lot of the same situations. She has really emphasized the importance of making time for talk therapy and just taking a break throughout the day. She does things like cook-alongs where she'll drop off the recipe, ingredients and cook with them right there over, Google Meet. She'll do nail painting and makeup lessons and drawing together. So all sorts of things just to make young folks really feel connected.
Yeah. And another thing you brought up was technology. And I think one thing that I've seen in my work is just the issues around technology and the huge digital divide. I think the pandemic has definitely exacerbated that. Can you talk a little bit about how you're helping the teens and the youth that you work with be connected or stay connected with technology?
So at the start of the pandemic, CCH was the first to roll out, the coalition was the first to roll out an emergency response fund. And that allowed us right away without barrier to start assisting young folks with the things we knew they needed. So that involved hotel stays for folks who couldn't get into shelter, groceries. But one of the biggest things that we've seen is internet and telephone. So keeping young folks' telephones on during this time has been critical for us to be able to communicate with them, for them to be able to have their needs met, to be able to get where they need to go, to be able to connect with, legal support, to do a Zoom appointment with a doctor. So all of these things, and we've been really fortunate to have that ability to support with those bills and to keep them connected and online during this time. And even just so we can check in with them regularly. I think we're talking to them more than ever. And we have young people who have even transitioned out of state due to necessity during this, and to be able to stay connected with them during this time too has been awesome.
Thank you so much. Elizabeth, I'd like to ask you a question. So you're a parent who has experienced homelessness, and you're also a leader with CCH pushing to make sure that kids in the Chicago public schools and throughout Illinois that are experiencing homelessness are not forgotten. Can you talk to both about how you and other parents have worked together and some of the victories you've achieved?
Yes, one of the things is that I really like about CCH was when we came for the meetings and everything, our focus was on our children, not just our kids, but the whole entire Illinois children. And we talked about computers, hotspots, and everything. And I mean, I'm happy that, I mean, they came through with all this. You know, and I mean, if it wasn't for CCH and us putting effort to it, I mean, our kids would have been flunked and repeated the same grade next year.
Mm-hmm. And so you and the parents, did you come to the table with some suggestions or ideas, or what was that process like? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, that was fun. I loved it. I actually loved it because I was like, I mean, I never thought I was going to be part of something this big, you know, like trying to talk to parents and teachers and everything about our students. It was amazing how, I mean, we came up with the idea and other suddenly, I mean, it just happened.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of those ideas? Can you tell us what what those were?
Yes, it was the laptop, the hotspots. And basically, we also talked about, like, for example, when we were at the other shelter, there was like noises going on in the background. My kids couldn't focus in class and everything. And I'm not only speaking it for myself because I know there's a whole bunch of parents out there that are afraid to speak up, you know, to let people know what's going on in the shelter. So I was like, why not give it my part of my ideas and do this? So we spoke to Miss Donna. She was a reporter. And I mean, I was like shocked when I saw my son and myself in the newspaper. I was like, oh my God, did this actually happen? Yeah, that was basically one of the good goals.
Yeah, really, really cool that you're able to do
Yeah.
that. Edrika, I'd like to ask you a question. So we've heard from Elizabeth about the importance of, you know, some of the extra supports, right, that she talked about that the kids were able to receive, and just in general, how important it is for folks experiencing homelessness to get some extra support during this pandemic. You are one of the leaders with CCH's Mutual Aid Fund, which was created in response to the pandemic to also provide extra support. Can you tell us a little bit more about how did the fund work? Like, what was the work to put that together, and how it works in general? And why do you think it was important for CCH to create the fund, and what makes it unique?
Hi, everybody. Excuse my darkness. It is, I am technology challenged, so we're really cozy today. So the Mutual Aid Fund was created by CCH to address the immediate needs of those experiencing or in danger of experiencing homelessness, or in danger of re-experiencing homelessness, especially during the COVID time. The Mutual Aid Fund is a one-time grant of up to $500. The Mutual Aid Fund is one of the first, I believe it's the first, but it's among the first of its kind to not only invest in people experiencing homelessness, but also allow the grassroots leaders to be an integral part of its creation as well as its implementation. This is unique in and of itself. The program design was purposed to make the application process extremely simple. No computer was necessary. You could actually apply over the phone. As one of the founding members of the governance committee, I was involved in the program design as well as its parameters. The uniqueness of the Mutual Aid Fund was designed by those of us who've had lived experience. However, the program standards were not lowered. For example, that we established a code of conduct, and we also recognized that because we all came from different types of homeless backgrounds, people experiencing homelessness, we had bias. We came in with biases while reviewing applications. The uniqueness of this program is that we were allowed to set the guidelines, and strict adherence to the guidelines were not only expected, but they were enforced. The committee reviewed the applications and contacted those who were approved. We even designed a FAQ, frequently asked questions page. And as to date, the first round, we served 342 people and gave out $169,000. We are currently in round 2, where we have 60 people and we have given out about $30,000, or is it 60? Yeah, about $30,000. The stories break your heart though, because we set certain parameters, and the main thing was that you had to have been homeless, experienced homeless, or you were in danger of experiencing homelessness. So we had to set that, and we had to adhere to that. But some of the applications were just heartbreaking. The stories, like we had this one young man who had just come out. He was 17, and he just came out as being gay, and he got kicked out of the house. We had another girl who was pregnant, a young girl who was pregnant, and she was sleeping in different hallways. We also came up with the resource page so that in case someone needed some extra help, they would be allowed to do that. The bottom line is that attitude reflects leadership. Through the Mutual Aid Fund, CCH's leadership has allowed not only to serve the typically overlooked and underserved population of those experiencing homelessness, but also they invested in the leadership development of its grassroots leaders, me being one of them. That's an example to me of advocacy based on real things.
That's super fascinating and really helpful to hear. I have a few follow-up questions for you. I'm really interested in learning a little bit about one, how do people, I guess you talked about there was a phone number people could call in, right, to get access to this fund. Can you talk about that in general? Like, is that the only way that people were able to access it? Like, how did you outreach people? Like, how do people find out about the fund?
We accessed it through the phone number, and also we put it up on the web, and you can also apply it over the web or over the internet. And we have a Facebook page. We put it on the Facebook page, and also we reached out to our service providers so that they could also reach out to different people who might be in need of some help.
That's super helpful. You also said that the fund itself was co-created with grassroots leaders, right? And people who've experienced, I think you said that people who've experienced homelessness. Can you tell me a little bit about that process? Because I'm really, really fascinated to understand like what that process was like for you.
Well, it was a process. There were 3 original leaders, myself and 2 others. And we wanted to make it so that we could encompass all people the different types of homelessness. It's not just one road to people experiencing homelessness. There are many, 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 many roads. And so we wanted to make sure that each one, or at least as many as we could, was represented in such roads. For example, we had some people with street homelessness. We had some people who experienced homelessness with children, people with shelters, people from downstate. So we did it all over. And then we had a committee of each one of us. It was three committees. It was one committee, but each one of us 3 sets of people to review and go over the applications. And the 3 of us, each team of 3, would get together and hash out who was able to receive this one-time grant. And it wasn't easy, but we managed to get it done, and we felt very, very proud. Very, very proud of that.
And you talked about in that first round, you were able to support was it 342 people, correct?
Correct.
and gave out about $169,000. About how much were the, I guess, grant sizes for individuals?
It was up to $500. So it was a sliding scale. So, you know, whatever you requested, up to $500. Only reason why we stopped, we ran out of money.
And, you know, I just think this is a really incredible model to have folks who've experienced it help create the questions and the applications, because truly the ones who have experienced that understand that. So I think that's a really, really cool way. And I think that's one way that it makes it really unique. In your opinion, what do you think the impact of this has been? Like, what's your sense of that?
I think the impact has been amazing because we had over 6,000. We were open for the application period was open for 5 days, and we had over 6,700 applicants.
Wow.
And it breaks the only drawback, if you will, it breaks your heart because you can't help more people. You know, because you just can't. But yeah, I think the impact is amazing. We're still getting calls about it, and we hope that with, you know, more funding that we can do even greater things.
Thank you so much, Edrika. Sam, I'd love to ask you a question next. So Edrika talked about the mutual aid fund, and while, you know, the fund is a critical tool for quick, low barrier support, it doesn't replace systemic advocacy and solutions, right? So if you could talk to us about CHARGE, and I'll let you share what the acronym stands for. It evolved into a group that took on that challenge. You, along with your colleagues, led the advocacy committee for CHARGE. Can you share more about it and what the advocacy looked like and what it has accomplished?
So the Chicago Homelessness and Health Response Group for Equity, referred to as CHARGE, originally convened in March 2020 to address the impact of COVID-19 on people experiencing homelessness in Chicago. It was originally a partnership between a shelter and a couple of hospitals on the West Side. And since then, it's grown to more than 100 members across 6 different committees, one of which is Advocacy Committee. So I support the Advocacy Committee alongside my colleague, Mary Tarullo. The group is now around 45 members. And initially we supported day-to-day needs of shelter providers and shelter residents. And CHARGE was a key advocate in establishing the hotel spaces for people experiencing homelessness downtown that were at high risk of COVID. So with advocacy from CHARGE, the city ended up providing hotel isolation for more than 200 extremely high risk people experiencing homelessness. And this effort led to so many more initiatives to house people quicker. And more recently, we've expanded our work to support advocacy in 2 issue areas. One is around the need for more supportive housing opportunities in the city. And then one is in the area of mental health and policing. It's really amazing to see shelter and healthcare providers and other advocates come to the same table in this way.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I'm curious, you know, if you can talk a little bit more about, you know, things obviously are, I guess, getting worse in terms of like cases in COVID. What sort of things do you think this group will be focused on sort of around advocacy now, given where we are in the pandemic?
So what we're learning about COVID, COVID is always changing what we know about it, and I think a lot of what we've done so far is policy related. In the early days of COVID, the city was prioritizing those that hadn't tested positive for COVID for housing, and effectively deprioritizing people that tested positive for COVID. It makes sense in theory to protect people who haven't yet tested positive by connecting them to housing, but in practice, it was incentivizing people to not get tested because a test may be positive and then this person might be at the bottom of the list for housing. So we work to reverse that, and I can see as what we learn about COVID changes in the months to come, we'll have that policy focus, but then also we've made the decision to focus on the 2 key issue areas of increasing supportive housing opportunities and a crisis response in the area of mental health and policing.
And this is just local advocacy, like city advocacy. Are you guys working
That's
on
correct.
state or any federal advocacy?
Right now it's local.
Just local, great. Thank you so much. Dre, you talked a little bit about the youth that you work with already and some of the challenges that they're currently facing. And how have you and the LYTE collective worked with CCH's attorney in the law project to help address some of these issues?
So the coalition and the law project has been instrumental in so many of the things that we've done. And I really want to lift up and shout them out for being so amenable to some of the challenges that come with doing this in a different way now, between some of the challenges in getting connected remotely to young people, as well as, court has moved to Zoom. So it's a whole different ball game and a different set of rules. It's much harder to communicate with the judge, with other attorneys. And, they've really stepped up and dug in and done a lot of research. Beth Malik over at the coalition has been instrumental in those pieces. And further, the piece around benefits enrollment has been huge. At the start of the pandemic, there was the availability of a stimulus check. But a lot of the young people that we work with hadn't filed taxes or weren't familiar or weren't aware that they could because they weren't working. And so getting those taxes filed, getting everything moving quickly so they could get those dollars for that support, as well as those young folks who were eligible for unemployment. But it was so challenging to get through to someone to get the correct PIN number. And Mary Francis over at the coalition has just been amazing. She continues to be amazing. I continue to email her 10 times a week. And she immediately will reach out to the young people. I think that what is most amazing is like the care that they give in supporting these young people. And it's a very mutually beneficial relationship because we're able to work together and make sure that the young person is supported through the entire process, whether it be court. For example, we've been working with one young mother who became homeless at the start of the pandemic due to domestic violence. And it's been an ongoing court battle and a lot of challenges. And Beth has been amazing in finding other attorneys to support, in communicating with the judge, whatever, with the court system to figure out where she needs to be, how to get there, helping me stay in the loop so that I can, mask up and be present with her when we jump on a Zoom court call together, helping work out childcare, getting to them for signatures, advising around filing police reports and all of these pieces that it's, no one can be master of all trades. So to be able to partner with folks with this type of legal expertise and that level of compassion is just absolutely life-changing for a lot of these young people.
Yeah, super helpful. You talked about, which I think was really interesting, benefits enrollment as an issue, and then you shared the example of this mother. What other sort of issues are coming up for the youth that you're working with as you're engaging with the law project?
So around the benefits,
or just any other, yeah.
Yeah, well, I know like around the benefits, it's keeping up with which offices are open, what you can do online versus over the phone versus what you still have to do in person, and how those things are being accommodated. And even beyond that, I would say on a larger scale, and this is probably something Sam can speak to as well, but with all of with COVID, so many things with, racial inequity and socioeconomic inequity have come to light already. And then when a lot of the civil unrest began and stores were closing and there was things happening in the streets, and, there was definitely a need to to respond and take a look at the social service system as a whole and realize, like, be reflective on ourselves and how can we do better? How can we break down some of these barriers? In what ways are we policing and monitoring and surveilling, you know, the constituency that we're meant to support? So we've come together, you know, the Homeless Youth Committee that Sam is also a part of, pivoted and had a breakoff group around anti-racism. And through that, really lifting up the voices of youth is one of our main goals. And that's one of the projects that we're working on right now. And also taking a step back and looking at what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I do think that that directly correlates to the ways that we've decided to disseminate funds during this time and showing how critical that is. Because, you know, we got the call from Doug at CCH that said, hey, there's so much going on right now. Like, take this. We know you know what to do with it and who needs it and how it can help. And in turn, we got to turn to young people and say, hey, what do you need? How can we help? Just tell us, we'll be there. And, you know, they're the experts on their own life. They're the ones, I mean, Edrika said it beautifully, like there's no one path to homelessness and there's certainly no one path out. And support looks different for every young person that we work with. And it's just, it's a matter of continuing that mentality and continuing to move in that way. And I think that the policy pieces and the advocacy that have been done with the Law Project and with the Homeless Youth Committee are really highlighting a lot of those changes that need to be made.
Great, thank you. And Sam, I would love, actually, you brought Sam up in this conversation and would love to get your perspective on some of the things that Dre was talking about. You know, we're dealing with the pandemic, but also dealing with, you know, a lot of racism and just grappling with what was happening in the city around that. I would love for you to talk about this committee where you were talking about anti-racism. I think it was a youth committee. I would love to hear a little bit more about that, Sam, if you don't mind.
So the youth committee was originally convened in the 80s. I think it was 1984, maybe, and it was response to a murder of youth experiencing homelessness in Uptown, and this group is a statewide group, and it was in June that the group decided to create an equity anti-racist working group to respond to the needs of youth experiencing homelessness and their interactions with police and service providers brought concerns, and we've been working through solutions that are youth led to address these needs of youth experiencing homelessness, and that work continues today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing about that. I would love to ask both Edrika and Elizabeth sort of our next big question. You know, we've talked a lot about some of the incredible work that's happened over the past 8 months to respond to the crisis. But, you know, as we're hearing in the news now every single day, we're experiencing more COVID-19 infections than we have at any other point during this pandemic. And as you know, being Chicagoans, we know that winter is close and what that means, right? So if both of you could just tell us, what do each of you think needs to happen both to support people experiencing homelessness through the pandemic and after the pandemic is over? And maybe we can start with Elizabeth.
Yes. My thing is to get people off the streets and put them into housing. And another thing is to help out with more hand sanitizer as possible, and trying to stay 6 feet apart.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Edrika, what are your thoughts? What do you think needs to happen both to support people experiencing homelessness through the pandemic and after the pandemic is over?
Well, as you know, as all of us know, COVID-19 has people dying at alarming rates. As we can see, it's beginning to spike again. And now, whereas COVID didn't cause homelessness, living through a pandemic certainly adds an additional layer of devastation for people experiencing homelessness. And I think the greatest thing that we can do to support people experiencing homelessness is to provide them with permanent supportive housing. The city of Chicago must make funding available to those experiencing homelessness a priority with more concrete items in the budget. Decades of underfunding have resulted in, like Sam said, over 77,000 Chicagoans that are experiencing homelessness. In an effort to address this, CCH is currently in a campaign called Bring Chicago Home. And we have, in Bring Chicago Home, our long-term goal is to create a dedicated revenue stream to address homelessness that will not be subject to this administration or subsequent administrations. We want it to be there at all times. Now, that's a long-term goal. Short-term is that we're specifically asking for 500 units for adults, specifically for doubled up households. Federal funding cannot be used for doubled up households, but city funding can. We know that this is going to be a battle, but remember, there's no victory without battle.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'd love to ask both Sam and Dre similar question. You know, we know winter is close. COVID infections are on the rise. What do each of you think needs to happen to support people experiencing homelessness through the pandemic and then after the pandemic is over? And let's start with Dre.
Yeah, so I think that obviously addressing the fact that it is winter and it's about to get cold out is a huge thing. We're already so limited on spaces for folks to be during the day if they're street-based or staying in emergency shelters. So that's definitely a solution that we need to find sooner than later. I think even moving beyond this, so as I think drove home in my other responses, addressing technology as a basic human right and the need for it, and to prioritize that without restriction and helping folks get that, because it's really hard to do anything else with that. Elizabeth said beautifully, let's get people housed. So and to Edrika's point as well, like the doubled up situation is very real. Those sometimes are some of the most unstable situations. Being asked to leave if they show symptoms or if someone in the house gets sick, that's a really major concern. And it also, if you're couch surfing from place to place, that's obviously going to increase the spread. I think that through the pandemic thus far, the way we've had to pivot and navigate systems in a different way and learn a new way of doing things, it's really shown us who in this sector is ready to be in this and build a sense of community. I think that we need to continue to challenge one another and have these conversations and ask why we do certain things the way that we do them. There's something as simple as doing an assessment for housing. You can now do it over the phone. It was never something they were able to do before. A young person or, a person experiencing homelessness would have to clear their entire day, be beholden to a certain schedule. And now they can pick up the phone and call a skilled assessor to get on a housing wait list. That is huge. Again, they need access to a phone or technology to do it. And then finally, this has been a major rollout for us as an organization. We have really been striving to set aside funds for an emergency fund and discretionary spending for our young people. And that first check that we got from the coalition that was followed up by a few other funders has allowed us to give out over $50,000 to support young people's needs. And we've had a lot of conversations with our board of directors that needs to continue. That needs to be a priority in our budget, and I think across the board. And the idea of giving with less restrictions, that means from the funders to the organizations, as well as the organizations to the people that we're serving, and recognizing who's experts in what. And finally, I'll just lift up the fact that, a conversation that keeps coming up in these rooms is making sure that we are lifting up the folks with lived experience as the experts. And a lot of times we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. And there's nothing worse than being asked for your opinion and then not seeing change. So I think continuing to really be intentional about how we're bringing folks to the table, how we're lifting them up, and how we are supporting them and their goals. So we're also trying to find ways to make sure that young people are getting fairly paid to do similar work to what we're doing, and probably doing it better. And, to continue to let them drive the work. And I think that that's where we're going to find a lot of the solutions that we've been looking for. I mean, it's right here in front of us.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah. Thanks for elevating that, the importance of centering those with lived experience. They understand and have the answers towards those solutions. So thank you for that. Sam, I would love to get your take on this question. What do you think needs to happen both to support people experiencing homelessness through the pandemic and then after the pandemic is over?
Echoing what Dre and Edrika said, I think one of the most important places for advocacy is housing for people that are currently doubled up or couch surfing. Like Edrika said, someone that's staying on a relative's couch or with a friend isn't eligible to receive a HUD-funded housing assistance. Housing for this population has always been a need, but there's an especially critical need to live behind closed doors in your own housing, not in an overcrowded situation. And I think we accomplished that by the city setting aside funding in this year's budget for doubled up households to address this gap left behind. This gap left by federal funding, because for many, doubling up is how they experience homelessness. And beyond that, I think there needs to be dedicated funding for homelessness, similar to what Edrika said.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to open it up now to answer some of the questions that are in the chat. And I think we're going to invite Doug to join us for this portion of the conversation. So we can invite Doug into the chat, or to the group. So I'm looking through the chat just to see what questions are coming in. So one question that came up, and this is, anyone can answer this. Are students and families getting bus cards from CPS? And what additional resources and needs are there, and we should be demanding for students? I
can speak loosely to this one, and I know that there's experts also on the coalition. So if young people are going to a one of the centers, the supervised centers, to use computers, then they can be supported with those bus cards. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure that that's not something that they're giving right now. They are supporting with transportation if folks need to get to the school or back from the school to pick up technology supplies in a lot of cases. I do think the schools are being as amenable as possible, and again, dealing with some of the funding restrictions. And this is something, I mean, if we talk about that in general, if I'm going to advocate for one major thing, and I would love if Elizabeth spoke to this as well, but transportation for children to school should be free. Like that's one of the biggest barriers to getting to school, and one of the major causes of truancy, I believe, in this city, and parents having to make the choice between feeding their children or getting them to school. It's kind of a no-brainer. So.
Yes, Elizabeth, I would love if you could respond to this, from your experience. What additional resources and needs are there that we should be demanding for our students?
For the students, I say more laptops and more hotspots.
Yeah, the technology need is real. The other folks?
Yes, it
Yeah.
is. Because
I will
I'm
lift up
sorry. I'm sorry.
the meal program as well. And they have been actually delivering when possible if folks show hardship in their ability to get there. And they've been very generous with the food that they're giving. I think that the staff on the ground level at the schools are just doing the most incredible job that they can.
Yeah. Other responses to the question? Now I'll move on. So another question in the chat, Elizabeth, how did you get involved with CCH? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. How I got involved with CCH was I met Alyssa Rodriguez at Casa Central La Posada. And I mean, it kind of got me interested the way she was like explaining herself about CCH. I'm like, how can this little person talking about a big, huge city, with so much spirit in her? And I'm like, I can never do that. I can never be part of that, the thing that she's doing. And when I told her, she was like, Elizabeth, you should come over to the office and, and give it a try, see if you like it. And I'm like, you talking to somebody that, I mean, all my life, I've been a country person because we came from the state of Florida. And, state of Florida, we were out in the woods. I mean, there was no transportation or whatsoever. And I'm like, you're talking to somebody that just came out of the country into the big city. And I'm like, I'm not familiar with the buses, with the routes and everything. And she was like, oh, you get the hang of it. It's fun. And once you get to know Chicago, you already had a lot of experience. So now I can say for experience that I do like it. I do like it because I move around and there's none stopping me now.
I love that. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for sharing. And
You're welcome.
Edrika, we'd love to hear from you too. How did you get involved with CCH?
I actually did not even know that there was an entity such as CCH or an entity for the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. And I met Wayne Richard, who is the director of organizing. He wasn't at that time, he was an organizer. And he got me in with the meal because he's like, oh, come to one of the meetings. We're going to have sandwiches or something. And I'm a foodie. So that's how I when I got in there. And then when I that got me there. But what kept me there was the camaraderie and the family and the fellowship of the staff and the grassroots leaders at the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, because they make you feel as though that you're not alone, that you're, because many times there's such a bad stigma associated with people experiencing homelessness that you feel all alone. And when you get to CCH, you totally dispel that. You're is part of a family. It really is. And the work that they do, and then the work that they do is amazing. And I felt like I could be a part of that. And it's amazing to look back on some of the stuff that we've done and look back and go, wow, I was a part of that, like the Fight for 15 or Homeworks. We've had a lot of different things. And it's amazing too that they actually, like Dre said, they actually take into consideration people who have had lived experience, and you actually sit at the table. We were wiping the table, okay? Not alone sitting at the table. So now we have a chance to sit at the table and actually be a part of the decision-making process. It is amazing. It really is.
That was really powerful. We were wiping the table and now we're at the table. Thank you so much for lifting that. That was super powerful. The next question in the chat, and opening up to everyone, what are some ways that people on this call can support the real, tangible, systemic change necessary to end homelessness? So what are some tangible things that we can all walk away from and think about doing to support this? Maybe we'll start with Doug.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think, the thing is just the most basic thing is talk to people. Talk to people about the reality of homelessness. There's a lot of myths about what homelessness is, what it isn't, how people become homeless, what their lives are like when they're experiencing homelessness. And sharing with people the reality, share the stories that you've heard tonight, share the stories that we share through CCH all the time. So people get a real picture of what homelessness is. And that's a huge, huge piece, that public awareness about the realities of homelessness. Particularly, let your elected officials know, your decision makers, be it your alderman, your legislator, let them know you care about this issue and that you expect them to care about it as well. They need to know that their constituents are paying attention, and they're paying attention about the decisions they make about funding, about policy as it relates to homelessness. We know that decision makers respond to the people who are supposed to vote for them. And so hearing from you about why you think addressing homelessness is important is going to shift them to be champions for the issue. And finally, the financial support makes a huge difference, right? Be it for CCH, be it for LYTE Collective, the dollars that you're able to give allow us to do the work that we do, allow us to run a mutual aid fund, allow us to support organizations like LYTE Collective, allow us to do the advocacy that we do. So those are all really critical pieces to the puzzle.
Thanks, Doug, for that. And 3 tangible ways that we can be involved. Any other ideas or thoughts that people want to contribute?
I want to lift up a phrase that I heard not that long ago that was solidarity over charity. So to what Doug just said, we need money. I mean, we need money to make these things happen, and we need to be trusted with that money. And the people who are in these situations need to be trusted to make the best decisions of how to spend that money. That is, of the utmost importance. But this idea that it's great to share your things, but taking a moment and reflecting on how you view what's happening in the world and how maybe you play into it. I mean, I've had to do a ton of reflecting to how I play into the systems that oppress people and keep them in these situations. We need to be challenging for livable wages, for affordable housing. And those things all come with advocacy and talking to our elected officials and really coming together. We all do better when we all do better. So this is something that affects us citywide. And if we don't think that there's a direct correlation between safety and the level of poverty in the city, we're extremely wrong. So I think that really to start to look at ways to come together and make sustainable, lasting changes, not just necessarily one-time gifts. Now, don't get me wrong, we'll take the one-time gifts too, but really thinking about how to be in this. And, a lot of times people think that means I have to be a social worker, or I have to be a policy changer, or I have to be a lawyer. And I think that I was a high school art teacher and I'm in this now. So, if we look at where all of us came from, it's possible to do this. And I also ask people to use the gifts that they do have to contribute. We need help with graphic design. We need mom groups that can come together and give advice to young mothers and pool together resources. So there's always ways that folks can leverage without directly having to be, in the work, getting a new degree, going back to school so that they can do all of this. Everybody, everyone is a cog in this process.
Yeah, no, thanks for reminding that we all have a role to play. I think we have time for one more question, and this is for Edrika and Elizabeth. Can you share what keeps you involved with CCH advocacy? We'd love to hear from you about that.
What keeps me involved, I'll go first. What keeps me involved is that the dedication of the staff. They work so well with us, and they are working with us with leadership development. And it makes I have grown as an individual. I have grown as a person, and we've grown. The grassroots leaders have grown as a group. And that, you can face this. There's a quote by James Baldwin that says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And CCH is out there, and we are facing this problem, and we are working with this problem. And I will be there until the end. This has become my new passion.
Yes, I love that. Elizabeth, can you share what keeps you involved?
Yes, what keeps me involved is, like, for example, when I was going through a lot of with my lot of problems with myself and everything, I mean, because of some of the CPS ladies know about it. You know, my kids were sexually abused by my family, and I had to move from the state of Florida to keep them protected from my family. And I met this lady in Facebook, and I mean, apparently she was doing the same thing that my family was doing to my kids.
Mm.
So I was going through a lot. You know, it was hard for me to take in. So when I met CCH, the group at CCH, I started reaching out to them, and they were basically there to hear me out. They were like my family. They supported me through the whole crisis. They were there to comfort me and help me through the whole situation. And now it's like I thank God for them. You know, it's like they're everything to me. They're everything. And I mean, I just don't have words to tell you guys how happy I am that I'm part of CCH, and this is what they do.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
Well, I
welcome.
just want to thank all of our speakers, Dre, Sam, Edrika, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening to share both from your personal experience and also the work that you're doing. It's very inspirational and it's powerful. So just thank you again for sharing, and we're so grateful to learn from you. I'm going to hand this over to Doug, who's going to close us out for the evening.
Thanks, Caroline. And again, I want to thank the panel as well, Dre, Sam, Edrika, Elizabeth, for sharing tonight. And thank you so much, Caroline, for moderating. You did a fantastic job. And thank Karenina at the front end for introducing. I just want to thank all of you who are in attendance for being part of this work. You heard some amazing stories this evening, heard about some amazing work that we're doing in the face of a difficult time. And it couldn't happen without all of our partners. And those partners are our grassroots leaders, there are members of our board, there are folks at the LYTE Collective and other great service providers, and they're all of you who help us in millions of ways, funding being one of them. It's the word coalition in our name, we take it seriously, and we don't get this done by ourselves. So thank you for being part of this work. Thank you for the contributions you've made in the past and the contributions you'll make in the future. We've done a lot of amazing things just in these last few months to make a difference. And we're going to have to keep working. There's more to do, but I know we can do it. And I know that we're going to keep having victories because we have amazing people like the people on this panel. I can't pretend to have the passion and the eloquence of Edrika. And because we have great partners and leaders like her and others, we're going to have victories. And so thank you for being there with us, and thank you for being part of this work. Have a wonderful night, everybody.